Welcome to E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy, a podcast brought to you by the Empathy Collective, a consulting firm that helps business leaders inspire change, one conversation at a time. We are building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a blue-collar worker or white-collar worker, small business owner or corporate executive, you belong in this community. Last week, you heard from Robert Quinn, Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business and best-selling author of several books, including Deep Change and The Positive Organization. This week, I continue my conversation with Bob on topics like purpose, intention, and change masters. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode where he shares a special exercise change leaders can immediately implement in their daily practice and see transformational results. Get ready to be inspired and enjoy. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. That actually dovetails really nicely into the other question I had around empowerment. And this podcast has the word in it, engage and empower with empathy. And, it's a buzzword. We throw it around a lot. But what does it really mean to empower people through change?
I'm going to tell you a story that you are going to fall in love with and repeat the rest of your life because of who you are. One of the most exciting studies I ever did was a study of public school teachers. Now, business school professors are not supposed to study public school teachers, but I did it because I had access to the top 1% of the public school teachers in the state of Ohio. Now, if you back up for a minute, you and I know public school teachers. You and I have spent 10,000 hours observing mediocre teaching, average teaching. That means that we could go, that's the theory of 10,000 hours turns you into a master, right? You can go to Carnegie Hall and play at Carnegie Hall if you'd had 10,000 hours of practice. Well, you and I have 10,000 hours of practice in knowing what mediocre teaching looks like. We know it so well that we define that as teaching. Now, just imagine that you get to interview all the teachers who are in the top 1%. They moved their kids 3 years of progress in 1 year. Impossible. Doesn't happen. Not real. Except there they are. And you begin to interview these people. Well, those interviews were the most exciting interviews I've ever done. Public school teachers who are, in fact, they would die if they heard this phrase, transformational leaders. They transform their classroom. They transform learning. And your child goes to the 4th grade in September and comes home doing 7th grade work, and so does every other kid in the class. These are people who walk on water. Now, we were interviewing one of these teachers, and she described her first day she ever taught. She said, I walked in, there were 30 little faces looking at me, and it was a panicky feeling. She said, there was one thing I remembered from the ed school. If you want to excel as a teacher, you need to know the needs and interests of every student. She said, I believed in that. I interviewed my students. I went to their homes, met their parents, looked at their bedrooms, saw how they lived. I spent a huge amount of effort getting to know every child. Now, I was deeply impressed. I'm writing that down. And as I'm writing, she said, and then I went to the next level. And my head shot up. I said, next level? What are you talking about? She said, well, then I discovered they're all the same. I said, all the same. You just told me every child's unique. Every child has unique needs and interests. She said, well, that's true. And they're all the same. When you do the former, what you discover is that every child wants to learn. Every child wants to succeed. Every child wants to be loved. Now, here's the key phrase. No matter what they say or do, Every child wants to learn. When you break that code, you can teach anybody, old, young, special ed, gifted, doesn't matter. Now, here's a 4th grade school teacher saying she has an unconditional theory of influence. And what is it based on? She's done something really important that no one ever talks about. She's generalized empathy. She not only has empathy for each individual student, she has empathy for the class as a dynamic whole. And she knows things that the novice doesn't know. You take the average school teacher and she says, my students come from that neighborhood. They don't want to learn. How can you teach them when they don't want to learn? And this teacher, with passion, says, that's my job. It's not the kid's job to want to learn. It's my job to inspire them to learn. You say to the assistant professor, he says, oh, my students are MBA students. They're just here to get jobs. They don't want to learn. How can I educate them if they don't want to learn? And most people just nod their head. My response is, what's the job? Your job's to inspire those MBAs to learn. Now take out MBA, take out minority students, plug in any other word. And in the human influence effort, our job is to inspire people to want to learn. If you do not have empathy for them individually and for masters collectively, you're going to struggle doing that. But this woman sees things no one else sees. And she behaves in ways no one else behaves. And her classroom is unlike all the other classrooms. Because she's excellent, what happens? Well, every administrator in the school district runs to her office and studies what she does, right? No. She said in 30 years, I'm retiring. She said in 30 years, no administrators ever crossed the threshold of my office. Well, where are the administrators? They're in the problem classrooms, solving the problems. They never see excellence. They don't know that excellence exists. They're not leading people to excellence. They're solving problems. Now, let's not laugh at them because that's us. I do it. You do it. Every one of us does it because we constantly default to the conventional mindset. We are suffering because we don't learn from excellence. We prefer problem solving. Problem solving is the source of our identity and our rewards. You know, I had a doctoral student, she was a postgrad, but she did her dissertation, went into a big company where there was constant chaos, and convinced them to institute a policy from the beginning of the morning until 11 a.m. there can be no meetings. You just work on the personal stuff that you need to get done, and meetings can only happen after 11. That was a tough sell, but she sold that and measured it. There was an enormous transformation. Everything got better in that company. She was so excited. She went back a year later and was stunned. It had all reverted back to the original condition. So she did another study. Why did they revert when there were so many payoffs? And the answer was, our rewards, recognition rewards, comes from solving crises, big problems. Without big problems, we can't get rewards. Now, that's fascinating to think about. We build cultures that perpetuate problems. Think about the political problems of today. We argue that we're trying to solve them. We're just perpetuating them. And so the notion of learning from excellence is a very, very rare skill. If you develop that skill, the payoffs are simply enormous, because now you become a gardener of excellence. You plant excellent seeds and you fertilize them and you weed and you nurture excellence. And the payoffs of that are extraordinary. You don't get 1% improvements, you get 352% improvements. But that's not available to the conventional mindset.
I mean, there are so many reactions I have to that. So my first is, one of the very first people I brought into my consulting firm that I'm in the process of launching right now is a math school teacher. She taught high school math. So you would think, change readiness consulting teacher, public school teacher, like what, why, how is that skill set even matching? But she is exactly the type of profile you were just talking about in your story. She is the positive influencer, the individual that steps into the classroom and inspires the class. I want that person driving transformation in organizations.
Why do you believe such a thing? That's ridiculous. You can't have a school teacher in a consulting firm. Why do you believe that?
I know. I'm gonna get my wrist slapped, but I'm gonna keep going, because what did you say? I'm on the edge. I'm on the periphery somewhere, not where all the problem solvers are, but somebody's got to sit there. So that's the one comment I had. The other one was around your description of empathy and collective empathy. And this is a term that is near and dear to my heart, because my consulting firm is called the Empathy Collective. The name came to me immediately. It wasn't even, oh, let's brainstorm some names. It was just, boom, that's what it's going to be. And the whole premise of what I've built is, how do we measure where an organization sits on the collective empathy continuum from a leadership perspective? So are we moving the needle closer to empathetic leadership, or are we leaning closer to apathetic leadership? The biggest challenge, and you just mentioned this so eloquently, is leaders are not measured on their level of empathy. So, we talk about performance reviews, right? You're measured on how well you've solved a problem. Not how much you've developed your people and helped them in their careers, or how much you've taken care of them during a crisis situation. There's no metric for that, and that does not show up in your performance review. What shows up in your performance review is, exactly to your point, the problems that leaders have solved. So do we need to change the way we measure performance and reward leaders and organizations? Is that what you're saying?
This is really important. If you lined up all the Bob Chapmans of the world, all the CEOs who understand what you want people to understand, and if you ask them, is technology important? Is efficiency important? Counting, HR, legal, they're going to tell you those things are critically important. If I don't have those things functioning correctly, I'm in big trouble. So as we move from conventional thinking to transformative thinking, it's very tempting to condemn the things that are the sources of the problem apparent. I can't emphasize them enough that shifting from the conventional mindset to the unconventional mindset, to excellence, to nurturing the dynamic whole, is not about demolishing the conventional mindset. It's about transcending it. There's a huge difference. So as a CEO, I need all the technical stuff to be correct. And I need management to solve problems. What I'm doing is going to the next level. I can have the best technology, the best strategy, the best efficiency in the world. But unless I have a great culture, I will not have a winning organization. And a great culture is a culture where people willingly do hard things for the common good. That is not the case in most companies or agencies. So a leader is nurturing a great culture, and that includes having excellent technical functions. So I have to nurture all the left brain stuff, all the measurable stuff. Well, I have to do that really well. And then I have to do more. People who are the change resistors by the first half, got to have all the technology right. But they reject the second half because it terrifies them because they don't know how to do that. And so it's about tempting people to cross the line and discover who they really are and what their organization really is. Because it's more than that technical reality. And that's a terrifying notion for most people. But it doesn't mean they can't do it, because there are so many Bob Chapmans. There's so many fourth grade teachers. There are so many all over the world. Think about it. You turn on a show called Super Nannies. Well, what's a super nanny? You have some dysfunctional family, you bring in the super nanny, and in 1 week's time, she's transformed the culture of the family, and you're functioning as a high-level family. Now, how is that possible? That's not possible. Nannies don't transform families, except they do. Not normal nannies, but super nannies. Why are there some golf instructors, the 1 in 1,000 instructor, who looks at you, doesn't do what all the others do, and says, let's think some new images. Let's pretend you're a tree. And all of a sudden, you're hitting the golf ball straight for the first time in your life. Where in the world did that golf instructor come from? Where did Bob Chapman come from? Where did Rebecca come from with her strange notions she's going to start a consulting firm on empathy? All over, we have people who are morally and cognitively continuing to develop and stepping across the conventional pattern of behavior. They're moving from average, normal, or mediocre towards excellence. We now have a lot of science that helps us understand what that process looks like, but it's not easily accepted by people, not because of logic or payoffs, but because of fear. I have to become something more than I am. And, Kim Cameron and I travel the globe. We spend a week teaching the science of positive organizations. The executives in the room eat it up. They love it. They rejoice in it. And on Friday, I say, what are you going to go home and do differently? And a look of panic crosses their face. Not resistance, panic. Because they know that back home, there's a conventional culture. And people who dare to challenge it have something horrible happen. The horrible thing is people laugh at them. They go to the water cooler and make fun of them. And that's terrifying. That's the first step towards death. Now, the death we're talking about is not physical death, it's professional death. The moment you start to marginalize me, I'm dying. And I know that in my bones, and I'm terrified. I don't want anyone to ever laugh at me. And people in all organizations use negative peer pressure to control their bosses, their peers, and their subordinates. And when I laugh at you, I'm using negative peer pressure. And so who's running the company? Well, it's not the authority figure. It's the people who use negative peer pressure that I'm terrified of. So excellence is very safe. You're never going to have to go to excellence because people can't get there. It takes some woman who's had enough of the corporate life that she says, I've got to take another path. I'm going to do empathy. And all of a sudden, we're on another path. It is scary. You've taken a big risk.
Yep, that steady corporate paycheck was nice. Yeah, it was comfortable.
Okay, now I have a question for you. To leave that comfort zone, there was an experience that was not normal, and it caused you to think new thoughts and to feel new feelings. Tell us that story.
Okay. I got the call from HR. My job was being eliminated. And I was actually offered a couple of other roles in the organization. So I could have stayed in that comfort zone and taken one of the other roles. But neither of those roles rung true with my internal purpose, and I knew I would be miserable. So I took the severance instead. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I spiraled into a bit of a depression for a few weeks. I cried, but then I emerged. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start interviewing for roles that align with my purpose. I had spent most of my career in marketing and strategy. I was looking at roles in internal communications, employee engagement, even HR related roles, but I had zero background in any of that apart from my 1 year leading change management. So the interviewing process was hard because people look at your resume and they're like, you're a marketing person. Why would we hire you for this role? I was challenged. And then towards the end of the interviewing process, I just started interviewing for marketing roles just because I knew I'd have a better chance. And I got to the end of the interviewing process for 2 roles. I was even sitting in a hotel room in San Francisco, about to go through a panel interview for a marketing role. And I panicked. I was like, why am I here? I don't even want this job. It doesn't speak to my heart. And guess what? I wasn't selected because I'm pretty sure that panel of interviewers, although on paper I met the job description beautifully, they could feel my heart wasn't in it. So I walked away from that. And I thought, you know what? I've been interviewing people about empathy for the last 6 months. How can I turn this into something that will help people go through change? My severance has run out. I have to get my kids through preschool. They're going to a private preschool. I have to pay the tuition. I had a moment of panic. My husband and I are going through a spreadsheet of all of our finances, eliminating, okay, we can delete this subscription, call the house cleaners. We don't need those people anymore. Like, we were literally panicking. But I knew deep down in my heart that this is what I was meant to do. And I surrounded myself with people who supported me in my dream to help people through change using empathy. And so that's when the business was born. And I actually brought my old boss in as my business partner because she and I were laid off at the same time.
Now, you know what's happening? Somewhere in his grave, Joseph Campbell is smiling broadly. And the people at Disney are saying, we need to contact Rebecca and get rights to that story because that's going to be our next Disney movie, right? You just described the hero's journey. That is the hero's journey.
I'm speechless. I don't know what to say.
A speechless podcaster, that's a bad thing.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not your typical podcaster, Bob. I like to listen more than talk. I'm here to learn and hear from inspiring people because that's what uplifts me. With every podcast interview, I walk away feeling better about humanity, better about the future, knowing that there's a group of leaders, you included, who are driving this world of people forward in a positive way. All using the power of empathy. I mean, it really is incredibly uplifting. And this conversation was definitely the highlight of my week. So thank you. So yeah, to wrap up the dialogue, biggest takeaway for me, it's really just engaging those positive influencers so you don't feel alone and isolated in your drive towards excellence. Do you have a number one takeaway for a business leader out there who's struggling with all this chaos and doesn't even know where to start?
Yes, there is a formula that any person can use in any state of high uncertainty or not. I wrote about it in the Harvard Business Review in an article. I wrote a book with my son Ryan about it called Lift. And it basically says that in any situation, there are 4 questions that you can ask that will transform you and they will transform other people. And the first question is very simple. It comes from Robert Fritz. This question is, what result do you want to create? Now, people laugh. They say, I'm a busy person. I ask that question all the time. Fritz says, no, actually you don't. The question you ask all the time is, how do I get what I want? If my husband and I are out of money and we're out of a job and we're canceling subscriptions, we're trying to figure out how to get what we want, which is survival. And the question is, What result do I want to create? Most executives never have an answer to that question. I use this question all the time. I have to help people answer the question. And when someone says, well, the result I want to create is I want to take these empathy interviews I've used for the last 6 months, and the result is I want to create a better world. You now have a purpose. You now have a calling. You now have something worth sacrificing for, worth learning for. The second question is, am I internally directed? Is my answer to question 1 authentic? Does it reflect my deepest values, my highest purpose? Is it real? If it is, I'm now full of power. The third question is, am I other focused? Do I see the other people in this equation? Do I have empathy for the individual and the collective? Do I understand beyond logic? Emotion is much more powerful than logic. Logic is the lowest level of consciousness and influence. While people want to believe the opposite of that, it is true. Am I emotionally connected to this world? Do I read the emotions? Do I understand the deepest needs of the people? Needs that they can't articulate. That's what you're doing in your work. You're saying, I now believe that there's a hunger, a famine out there that no one's taking care of, and I'm trying to take care of it. You're reading the unspoken needs. The last question is, am I externally open? Am I humble enough to learn? So those 4 questions are designed to create intention, integrity, empathy, and humility. If I live in intention, integrity, empathy, and humility, I will create a better me, and I will create a better you. And so anybody can ask those 4 questions. Now, answering them requires intense effort. But those 4 questions change you, and they change the world. I've had many people internalize the 4 questions, and then they use the 4 questions all day long with the people they work with. And then they tell me, after 2 weeks of anger, my team transformed. Now my subordinates come to me not with problems, but with answers. We have entirely different conversations. Well, they're now transforming the world. 4 simple questions. If you want to really dive into those, then get the book Lift, The Fundamental State of Leadership. That title suggests leadership is not what we think it is. It is not a position. It is not a cluster of skills and experiences. Oh, we can't hire you over here because you're a marketing person. It's not skills. It's not knowledge. It's not position. Leadership is a state of being in which I am a purposive, dynamic, expanding, progressing, growing, empathetic human being, bringing people to the same state. When you discover that, everything changes.
That's powerful. What a great way to end this conversation. I think I've just now created an action for myself to journal on those questions every day. I mean, we talk about having a gratitude journal. I've interviewed a lot of people about that who think about gratitude, which is wonderful. But these questions are deep and important, and especially in this time of turbulence, great way to focus and kind of dig into our internal compass. So thank you so much for being here today and for spending time with me. This was such a wonderful dialogue.
Rebecca, thank you for being who you are.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you would like to learn more about the Empathy Collective, check out our website, theempathycollective.com. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.